All right, the ELDs, or electronic logging devices. This is something that's been on the news a lot here lately. So what are the ELDs? The ELDs require that the truck drivers use an electronic logging device to monitor their driving hours. These ELDs are going to be there to verify that the drivers are adhering to the current hours of service. In the past, they could use paper logs, which didn't have the same accuracy as the ELDs will have. ELDs are connected to the truck's onboard computer or diagnostic system, so they know when the truck is actually moving versus sitting still. Along with the logging device that's attached to the truck, it also ensures, as we mentioned earlier, that the accuracy of the logging.
So what's the hype with the ELD? You know, they're saying that it's putting trucking companies out of business. You know, why is that?
So there's a couple of factors. One, there is a cost associated with it. They are going to have to purchase the device and the software to go with it. Some drivers aren't wanting to make the changeover. So they're probably just going to leave the market and not drive anymore. So those are going to be your two biggest factors, and just the way that they're being monitored now. They have to log it the way they're actually driving it.
Have the hours of service requirements actually changed, or this just really enforces them?
Correct. So the hours of service have not changed here in the last couple of months. It's just the enforcement method to monitor them. So the electronic logging device, or the ELD mandate, what will be the impact of the ELDs and what can be done? As far as the drivers, once the driver's day is started, he or she cannot stop the clock. The time spent waiting or sitting in a dock potentially could be taken away from their driving time. Also, pre-planning and time management is going to become more important for the drivers and their dispatchers. And then lastly, the term driver-friendly freight is going to be probably start to be heard more and more. Facilities to get drivers in and out quickly are going to be those driver-friendly locations. As far as customers, the transit time needed to transport your goods is now under tighter control. And how much time the driver spends on average at your facility is probably your biggest role in the situation. So if the driver is sitting there waiting for a dock on a busy day, or just waiting to be loaded, that's time that could potentially be taken away from their driving. So the biggest thing you can do is shorten the amount of time that the drivers are there to be loaded or unloaded.
Is this just for over-the-road drivers, or is this for local drivers as well?
It applies to all drivers. It's probably impacting the over-the-road guys more than it is the local drivers. Their days still start and stop pretty much at the same times. They do have a factor in their days as well, but the biggest impact is going to be seen on the over-the-road.
What happens if a driver is 30 minutes or, I mean, even 3 minutes from, is there a grace window, you know, from the delivery point and the hours of service regulation? That's
a sticky question. Technically, when their time's up, their time's up. Now, I think they are allowed to get to a safe spot. Obviously, if they're in the middle of a highway, they're allowed to get to a safe spot. But other than that, when your time's up, your time should be up.
Do like box trucks with lift gates, do they fall under this mandate as well?
Any commercial vehicle that's transporting property will be affected. So here's a quick summary kind of the hours of service. We have a 14-hour day limit. So once a driver's day starts, they have 14 consecutive hours to complete their duties for the day. 11 hours of that can be driving. That's the maximum. And that can only be taken if they've had 10 consecutive hours off duty prior to that. A driver must also have a rest break, at least 30 minutes each day by the time they get the end of their 8 hours. So the drivers do have to take a 30-minute break at some point during their day. And then they have to get in the 10-hour break, 8 of which has to be in the sleeper berth. And then they can have 2 other hours consecutively that can either be in the sleeper berth or off duty. But they just have to be, those 2 have to be consecutive, as do the 8.
And does this play into effect why there's such a driver shortage? What are the other factors of why there's such a driver shortage right now?
A lot of it has to do with the, I call it quality of life, I guess, if you want. The younger generation isn't wanting to spend their life on the road. They want a more regular schedule where they're home every night. So the over-the-road driver, they're maybe home once every 2-3 weeks versus being home every night. So that's probably the biggest factor, and the reason why the number of people coming into the profession is not as high as the number that are leaving. And
the number that are leaving is pretty high right now. Everybody's retiring.
That's right. It's really, the average age is, I don't remember the exact number, but it was 50 plus is the average age of most drivers on the road. So here's an example of a logbook for a day. So in this example, we can see where he came on duty at midnight. He was probably doing his pre-trip in this first hour, and then he started driving at 1 a.m. He drove for 5 hours. Then he went off duty for an hour. Then he came back on duty, he drove for 3 more. And then he was on duty again, but not driving for a while. Then he drove, and then his day was over at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And he had to take his 10-hour break. So he met his break in the between 6 and 7 a.m. So he was in compliance with the hours of service. You see the dip down here, the on-duty not driving between 10 a.m. and noon. That is a good example of when a driver could have been at a dock if he was unloading his own freight or doing something to that effect. That is time that while he was on duty, he was not driving, and he possibly could have had another hour to drive potentially in this example. So here's one of 2 days back to back. In this one, we start out with the driver starting his day at 10, and then he comes on duty and does his pre-trip. He drives. He does get his break in there. He went off duty for an hour between 4 and 5, and then he went into the sleep. Then he went back to driving. Pardon me. And until 10 o'clock, he went off duty for a while, and then he went into the sleeper for 8 hours. And then he went back off duty again. So that completed his 10 hours consecutively that he needed. And then he was able to start driving again. So then you have the dip down there for a pre-trip. Then he started driving. Then he went off duty, got his break in. He had 4 more hours. Then some other on-duty activities he needed to do. Then he finished up with his driving and off duty again. So in this example, there weren't any violations and everything was done properly.
So, what are some things that are really going to affect this? Like, waiting time at airports, weather.
Yes. So yeah, anytime anything that's causing the driver to have to stop outside of, so times at docks, times at airports, stopping to fuel, stopping to eat, all those things, stopping to use the restroom, any of these things that a driver needs to do throughout his day. If he has to come off that driving line to do it, then that's just time away from being able to drive. And the biggest thing is once they start that clock, the 14 hours, then they can't stop it, and it will be over at the end of 14 hours. Here's one more example where it kind of specifically looks at just the 30-minute break. In the previous examples, he went off duty for about an hour, but all that is required is a 30-minute break. So in this one, he came on at 10, went on duty, then started driving for 7. He was on duty 2 more for not driving. Before he can drive again, he has to take that 30-minute break. before he can start driving again.
On duty, not driving, and then you have to take a break. So what's he doing? What are examples of
So
what he's doing?
he could be at a facility. He could be loading or unloading his trailer. That is something that would be on duty but not driving. So if he's doing anything that pertains to work and on the truck, that could be time that's still on duty.
Okay.